What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome back to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game. My name is Augie Johnson, and I'm here with my partner, Alex Engel, and we hope you're able to pick something up from today's episode that will help you in your basketball journey. Today, we're going to be talking about the things that we didn't personally like as players and how that relates to kind of how we coach, and maybe talk about some of the things that we continue to do that we really didn't like as players, and things that we threw into the trash because we didn't like them as players. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. All right, guys, welcome back to today's episode. We appreciate you guys watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe if you're new, and if you haven't subscribed, and if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, go ahead and follow us there as well. We release a new episode every single week. And like I said, we're going to talk about the things that we didn't like as players. And if you don't know, we're both varsity basketball coaches currently. And so we're not too far removed from being players, but, maybe in the past 10 years or so, we could say that we were players. So it's just an interesting topic, because I think a lot of times, and at least for me personally, as a player, I would always, think to myself and be like, when I'm a coach, I'm never going to do that. When I'm a coach, I'm never going to do that. And as you become a coach, you start to see like, okay, players, they don't like to do this conditioning drill because they're lazy, right? So, but it's needed. We need to be in shape. So I guess to start this off, let's just start with this one thing that you specifically can remember as a player that you didn't like.
The one thing that I remember, and it kind of does relate to like conditioning, but we had to do in college, I think it was my junior senior year, we had to do what are called pull-up hangs. And those are where you pull yourself up. I'm sure if any of my teammates are listening, they remember this and are saying the same thing. You had to pull yourself up, hold yourself there for like a minute. And you had to do it, I think, 3 times. And it was part of this like test, this conditioning test we had to do. I was never a huge fan of conditioning in general. Like, I don't think there are not many players that are just love doing conditioning, but I always stayed in pretty good shape so that when it came to it, I wasn't just, out there dying on the field or in the court, wherever we were running. But pull-up hangs were just tough because it's just not something that you naturally do. You don't naturally just hold your arms in this position for that long. And it was something that I felt was one of the few conditioning drills that I was like, I'm never, ever going to have my players do that, because I didn't see the value in it. And maybe I'm wrong, and I still kind of feel that way. I'm like, I don't know how that really helps me on the basketball court. So I didn't really see a whole lot of value in it, but that was tough. And it was one of those things that you just couldn't prep for unless you did pull up hangs all the time, And I know in the summertime, like I definitely wasn't sitting in the gym up here just holding myself up for a minute. So that was definitely one of the things that I was like, yeah, I'm never doing that with my program or ever again after we get done with this.
Yeah, I mean, that's an exercise right there. If you're looking at it solely for the fact of like, how does this make me better as a basketball player? Probably can't really answer that with a good
Yeah.
answer. But for me personally, like one thing that I never understood as a player, but now I'm starting to understand, I think more as a coach, is you do things like that, which you can't explain why it's good or how it can help you be a better basketball player, but you have your reasons for doing it. One example that I can think of is the 6-minute mile. Like I feel like, or even running the mile, or going for, ever having your players go and run a few miles, right? Like there's some value, right? So there's some conditioning there, but I think we can all agree that more sports specific conditioning would be running some sort of sprint with some change of direction and stuff like that, because you're not going to go run at, a medium speed in the game for that long. But
Mm-hmm.
with all that said, as a coach, I make my players run a mile. We have to run the 6-minute mile. That's part of what we do. And I do it more for the team bonding and that kind of stuff. Do you think that maybe there was some rhyme or reason in that way for your coach to make you guys do that?
Well, yeah, and what I was thinking while you were talking about that was what it does do is it does test you like mentally, because it's a mental challenge, whether or not I think any type of conditioning drill, even if it's not sports specific, it's a mental challenge. Like, are you going to be tough enough to get through this? Do I think that me doing pull-up hangs did that? Sure, absolutely, because I had to mentally be like, all right, I'm going to have to tough this out if I really want to pass this conditioning drill, right? So there is value in that. And I agree. And I think with the mile, kind of the same, although I would say the mile has way more sport specific, conditioning to
Yeah.
it at least than a pull-up hang. But I guess what I feel is I'm okay with the mental challenge. I'm okay with doing stuff sometimes that aren't necessarily super sports specific because, like you said, just being like, hey, who's tough and who's not, who's going to be able to stick this out. But I just feel like you can do that and still make it productive for your sport. And I guess for me, that's where I'm like, the pull up hang just doesn't do it for me. Um, Even for people that complain about the mile, I'm like, well, you're still running, you're going to get in better shape, at least your long-term like game shape. Maybe you won't be able to sprint faster, but maybe you can run for, 48 minutes or 40 minutes, I guess, in college instead of 30, cause you have that longer endurance built up a little bit. But I think a lot of it is that mental challenge, and maybe you're right, the bonding and being like having your teammates help you out and get through an exercise that's difficult.
Yeah, I think any teams that go through adversity together brings them closer together as a unit. And so in college, I got that belief from college when my coach telling us that actually we had super hard conditioning and before season started, and he said that one time, you got to go through some stuff together to bring you closer. And I was like, I see what you did there. And it honestly, it worked. It worked. We're out there running the dunes, you can do it, all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to game time, you know that you got each other's back, and you've gone through it together, and you deserve to win, and you can push through hard times and all that kind of stuff. I guess since we're talking about conditioning, I'll drop one of mine that I really hated, and it was the mile, and it was in college, and we had to run the mile at like an Indian run. So if you don't know what that is, that's where you run in a line, and the person in the back has to run a little bit faster and get into the front. And once they get into the front, the next person who's in the back has to run and sprint to the front, and it just kind of rotates like that. And in college, we did all this training for preseason on the track, like tons. Because if you don't know, in college, at least at NCAA, you can't touch a basketball. You can't do like big group workouts until, I don't know, October 15th or something. So you're on the track, and we had to run an Indian mile. And the funny story is I was in the second group, like not the fastest guys, like the point guards and the other guys are just super fast. I was in the second group for the whole time. And I think we had to make a crazy time, like 5:30 or something like that in the Indian mile. And the day that we went to run it to test, and I'm like, 5:30, I can do this, 5:30. One of the guys in the fastest group actually was like, I can't do it, coach, I need to switch. So that day he switched me, put me in the fastest group, and we had to run it under 5:10. And all of a sudden I was with all these quick guys, and we actually ran it in 5:06. And we're able to do it. And that was the fastest mile time I ever ran. But I always told myself I would never put my players through that because, well, honestly, some players were getting injured, not just from the mile, not from that, but like through such a difficult conditioning period. People were pulling their hammies, and even before the season started. I guess, have you ever had to run a mile or anything for any of the teams you played for?
Yeah, I think, shoot, probably every single team I played for, we ran a mile in some format. But the toughest, and the toughest one that I did. So it was incorporated, and I was going to talk about this anyway, so I'm going to tie it in right now. But we had this drill when I was playing at Cuesta. It's called a 24-minute drill. And it's kind of like, if you're from this area, maybe not nowadays as much, but like definitely back when I played and before me, and you were going to go play at Cuesta, like, or even if you weren't, you were in high school, you knew about this drill because Coach Blair was like famous for this drill. And it's 24 minutes of conditioning, but it's like all these different drills in that 24-minute time. And the first part of it is running a mile. And everybody has to make it under 6 minutes. So whether you're like me, a 5'10" point guard, or if you were my 6'10" post player, you had to make it under 6 minutes. It was all the same. But the thing was, the trick really was you wanted to run it as close to 6 minutes as possible because you want to save your energy for the rest of it. So you'd have guys coming out the first day that are coming for tryouts, or just came out here a week, been in slow for a week, and they're like, oh, I'm going to run it fast. They run like a 5:20 mile, and then they get to the next step and they just can't do anything anymore. And with this 24-minute drill, you had to pass every single like part of the drill in order to pass the whole thing. So if you messed up on one drill, the whole thing was void, and you had to do the entire thing again next week. So it was a 6-minute mile, and then you had to go run over to the gym. You had like a couple minutes to run to the gym, switch your shoes on, gym shoes. Then you do what's called a 50-second drill, which is 4 times sprinting forward and then backpedaling back. So up, back, 4 times in under 50 seconds. And then you have like a little break, another one of those, a little break. And by little break, I mean like 30-second breaks, like 30, 45-second breaks. Then you had 2 suicides in a row, and then a little minute break, and then 5 what are called 7-11s, which is up and back in 11 seconds with a 7-second rest in between each one. And you do 5 of those. So that was like the whole drill, and it takes 24 minutes exactly. So if you pass that drill, to coach, you were in shape supposedly. Some guys, it would take like 2 months, 2.5 months from the pass it. And my sophomore year, I remember we did that drill. A teammate and I passed it, and the suicides were supposed to be done in 30 seconds, right? So my freshman year, we passed it. Sophomore year, first week, my teammate and I pass it, right? At the end of the drill, coach goes, "All right, nobody passed. You guys got to do it again next week." And we're like, "What do you mean? We passed it?" And he's like, "No, you missed on the suicides." And we're like, "No, we passed under 30 seconds." He's like, "It's not 30 seconds this year. It's 28. We're not as good as we were last year."
Wow.
We were so mad. And so we did pass it the next week, but it's one of those drills where, and you've probably felt this, like after you're done running, you can like taste like the iron in your mouth because you've been running so hard, and you just have to like sit there for 5 minutes and let your body recover. So that was rough. Getting that sprung on us was rough, but I mean, we had a really good season, so maybe it worked.
Yeah, that's funny. That's the thing I think people don't know about athletes is that you really do go through some hard stuff. If you go all the way to college and all that kind of stuff, you got some stories to tell about some conditioning stuff normally. I mean, not always. I feel like nowadays people are more they rely on the numbers and the science and that kind of stuff. So there's maybe more intelligent conditioning and stuff like that.
Right.
But not. But still, some people still do that kind of stuff. So yeah, and I remember like for those kind of things where like the next day you have to do that, like that night you're like not eating any sweets, you're trying to get to bed early, and then you might wake up at like 4 a.m. and start thinking about it, and you can't go back to sleep. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. I remember those. Okay, cool. So that's some interesting conditioning ones. Is there any other ones that you can think of off the top of your head as far as things that as a player you're like, I don't really like this?
I'm not a huge fan, and I actually thought about it as we were talking. I'm not a huge fan of punishment running when it's like excessive. And what I mean by that is I don't mind the whole, if you show up late, you have to run. I still implement that in my program now. You show up late, you got to run a suicide. It's always been every program I was around was every minute late is a suicide for that minute. So I still use that. And that keeps people accountable. And, really, to be honest, I don't have problems with people being late because they know that. If they're not there, they're going to run. And I think that's reasonable as a player. I understood it. But what I mean by excessive stuff is like, oh, we're doing a drill and you guys missed too many layups. So now you got to go run 2 suicides as like punishment for it. And I'm just like, I don't like that because one, I think it breeds almost like fear into the players. Like, I don't think it breeds confidence. I think it breeds the opposite. Like if you're so afraid to mess up that you're going to have to run that you're more likely to mess up, that in my opinion. And 2, I just think that you waste a lot of time where you're just running for no reason, where you could be like, okay, you're not making enough layups. You're not satisfying the drill. Just do the drill again, and like now you're getting more reps and it's still conditioning anyways, because you're probably running in the drill right as it is. So for me, I'd rather just be like, okay, that wasn't good enough. We got to do it again. But the whole I remember sometimes being like, oh, coach is mad at us because we're not performing well. Get on the line and run a bunch of suicides. To me, it's just, I just don't like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can use running as a tool, like for example, like when kids are goofing off, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you just make them run a suicide, and then it's probably going to be a lot more serious from then. Or like for me, I use running a lot for competitions, right? You're having kind of a sloppy or lazy practice. All of a sudden, you throw, hey, losers got to run a suicide. That changes everything. All of a sudden, people start fouling and
Mm-hmm.
they start competing. But like you said, if you're going to use practice time up for that, that's, at least for me, who's doesn't have a ton of practice time, like I would really, be worried that I would be spending too much time doing conditioning if that's only thing I'm using it for, as far as like missed layups or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think you can, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting running into practice, but I think you want to find a way to try and make running like as positive as possible. Because then when the kids are doing it, they're more likely to want to do it. So like last year when we would run, I always told the girls, like, look, I was like, this is not punishment. Like none of this is punishment. I said, this is all so that when we get into season and we're mid-league and you guys are in the best shape of, every team in the conference, you can keep pushing and you guys can win. So like use this as like, this is just building blocks for us to get better. And so when it came to time to run or do conditioning, they were kind of like, all right, here, yeah, do we want to run a couple suicides? No, but like, hey, let's take care of this. Let's knock this out. We got to do this to get better, And I think if you can find a way to do that, they're going to accept it more and be more willing to work with you on it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so that's another conditioning one. What about anything like maybe tactical or some maybe drills that you did as a player that you found like that you just didn't like?
So one drill, and I do use it. So it's a drill I didn't love as a player, but I do think there's value in it. We called it hourglass. I've heard it called a lot of different things, but hourglass defensive slides, or just full court figure eight defensive slides, where basically you're sliding the baseline, then you like sprint part of the sideline, then you slide across the midcourt, and you sprint up the other sideline. It looks like a figure eight, or an hourglass, and they just weren't, they're not something that I was super excited about, to sit down in a defensive stance and do all these sprints and little things. But I do think there's value in it. So it's like, you may not like every drill you do, but you can still find some value in it, And I think like you talked about, some of the drills we were mentioning today, we're like, hey, we didn't like these drills and we don't find value in them. But this is a drill that, for me, when coach is like, all right, we got to knock these hourglass drills out, or, figure eight slides out, I wasn't super hyped on it, but I understand the value of like, okay, make sure you're sitting down in your correct stance, make sure you're sprinting full speed, doing everything right technique wise, so that hopefully when you get in a game, you'll have that same technique and it'll just be kind of like more second nature to sit in that stance.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of drills that we could talk about that we didn't like as players, and a lot of them are probably defensive drills, right? So, I mean, you mentioning that makes me think of one that I would think of as a player that I hated, and it's just like defensive zigzag drill, right? With no
Mm-hmm.
offense, just the defense out there zigzagging back and forth, full court. I used to hate those as players, and I remember it's like I used to always wait until coach would blow the whistle. All right, now add the offense, and then now you're guarding somebody and it's still dummy defense, dummy offense, but at least sometimes you blow the whistle again. And now we'd get to go live from half court, and then that's when I was like started enjoying it. So I guess for coaches, yes, there is value in doing, the dummy defense stuff, technique wise and all that stuff, but also at the same time, how can you incorporate the technique stuff into more live situations to where it's just more fun, right? Just more fun. And also I think there's more value. I mean, there is some stuff where you got to do kind of on air just to get the super basics down. And it totally depends on who you're coaching. If you're coaching youth players that have never played defense, then you probably should start like, just with the technique. But yeah, I mean, for me as a player in practice, I wanted anything that had competition in it or something that's live. And so anything that didn't really incorporate that, I was just like, not really feeling it right now. But you have to do those things. You have to get your shots up. It's just like working out individually.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all rather play 5-on-5 than go work out individually. But we know that if we don't ever work out individually, then we won't get to become the player that we want to be.
Yeah.
And that kind of reminds me too of another drill that I used to hate as a player. And that's like the whole defensive floor slap, hands up, step, like the camp drill, step, push step, push
Mm-hmm.
step, that's another one that I hated as a player. And I don't know, did you ever have to do that one as a player? I'm sure you did.
I think so. We did. Yeah. We definitely did. It wasn't something we did a ton, but I do remember doing that. I feel like it was a drill we may have done like more in the preseason when like the coach was just teaching us the basics so that we understood what he wanted, from us. Um, so yeah, we definitely did that. And like you said, I've seen it at camps a lot, and I think we've done it at our camps and stuff too. But
Yeah.
I do think, you were talking about getting to a point where you can make these drills into live drills. I still think even at the higher levels, it's okay to start with, like, even if every day you're doing, like I said, a zigzag drill, it's okay to still do a dummy one, before you go live. Because if you constantly remind your players of like, hey, this is it, it may seem like, oh, God, this is boring, we're going through the same thing again. But if that's the case and they're doing it right, that means it's really becoming just like part of them, it's becoming second nature to them. And I think you can do it quickly, like just before you get into your live, you do one or two little sets of the dummy ones. And then it's so innate within them at that point that now you can go longer with the live stuff, and it's less of the 5-on-0 or the dummy stuff. And then they still get their little reminder, but then they actually get to go compete, like you said, which I agree. There is more value once you have the skills, mastered, for better, for lack of a better word. then the competition stuff is more realistic with what you're going to see in a game. But I'm not necessarily a believer. I'm not saying you are, but some people I think they're like, oh, once I learn it at elementary school, I should never do it again. I should only do it live. And I just don't agree with that. I think it's fine to do stuff 5-on-0 or without a defender, without an offensive player sometimes. Just don't have to spend as much time as you did when you were in 5th grade.
Yeah, and even I think doing it just earlier in the season, and maybe from then on out, you don't have to do it on air anymore because now the expectations are being built and stuff. Because I don't think you can really it's harder at least to build the expectations live because there's just so many variables and so many mistakes, right? I mean, that are happening with any kind of technique. I mean, if we're talking about defensive slides, if you're just going to jump into live, then you're going to see the feet coming together a lot more than you would if you were doing it on air, dummy defense style. You can really kind of focus, I guess, on the details. So it's good stuff. What about tactically? Like, let's say your coach is like, we're pressing every game. We're a pressing team, dude. And you're like, I hate pressing. Or is there anything like that you can think of?
I know are you talking about defensively or offensively or either side?
Either or.
I think we probably both are going to put this one down, but 5-on-0s. It's one of those things that I use and I do see the value in it, but as a player, I got bored of it because generally speaking, I was able to pick up on the plays most of the time. And so I didn't need a ton of 5-on-0s. And I know sometimes like my coaches, if we were not running stuff right, they'd be like, all right, on the baseline, 5-on-0s, you guys can't run your plays right. You got to go through them all 5-on-0. And I'm just like, dang it, because someone else can't do it. Now I got to sit here and do 5-on-0, but that's the problem and that's why there is value in it is, not everybody learns the same way and not everybody learns at the same speed. So I sometimes would have teammates or even I've had kids that I've coached that 2 months into it and they still don't know the offenses, they don't know all of them, at least all what they should. And does it suck for the kid that knows it like the back of his hand or her hand? Yeah, it does. But at the same time, you're just building that memory more. And so I get why it's necessary. And I think as long as you don't overkill it with like the 5-on-0s where you're spending half an hour every day on it and you're not going live at all, then you're going to be okay. I kind of feel the same way as we talked about with like the defensive slide stuff is, if you do 5-10 minutes of 5-on-0s and let them kind of go on their own, and probably more than 5 minutes, but 10-15 minutes 5-on-0s and let them do it. And then the next 15-20 minutes, you let them play live, even if it's just half court. Then they're like, okay, we understand why we're doing this 5-on-0. They don't burn out on it. But if you just do like 30-40 minutes of walkthroughs every day with no defense, like people are going to get tired of doing that, So that's one of the things I've thought of.
Yeah, and 5-on-0 is a tricky thing too, because you could look like a pro 5-on-0 and then like, especially if you're running like a motion, right? It's like where there's all reads and just concepts you're playing out of. So when you do a 5-on-0, everyone's passing and cutting and the ball is moving. But as soon as you go live, that's where the learning really happens. And that's where I think the coach has to blow the whistle and stop it and freeze everyone and say, hey, look at the spacing here, or, look what they were doing over there. They're sending a back screen, So yeah, I'm in the same boat. I like doing 5-on-0 as warm up. So like instead of doing a 3-man weave or whatever to get the legs warmed up, some high knees, some layups, whatever, we'll just go break up everyone on their own, not on their own basket, but 5 guys per basket. I'll just holler out what we're doing, what play we're running, blow the whistle. They run through it once, twice, and then different options. And then, that could be a 5-minute thing. Now we're warmed up. But yeah, I try to get into the live stuff as fast as possible. One drill that I used to hate growing up was all the Pistol Pete drills, like the ball wraps around your waist, around your head. And I remember in 8th grade, we used to do those every single day in practice. And at the time I was like, this is stupid. We're not even dribbling. We should be doing layups. And I'm still in that boat to a certain degree, but I do see that from certain ages, those probably should be your daily vitamins every single day, from probably like ages 5 to, I would say 6th grade maybe. But I think at some point, right, if you're in the NBA doing ball wraps every day, like that's probably not the best use of your time. But that's just one that I thought of. Did your coaches ever make you do that? Did you ever have Pistol Pete?
Yeah. We didn't, I don't know, kind of, I guess, like I said, at Quest, Coach Blair used to do some of the ball wrap stuff. But it wasn't like an everyday thing. Like he would show us stuff and kind of here and there we would do warm up ball handling with him. And so we would do some of the ball wraps and stuff too. And when I do stationary, I have a stationary routine that I do with my my kids. They're sometimes I'll mix ball wrap stuff in, but normally it's just dribbling, But I guess it is kind of the Pistol Pete stuff. Like a lot of it is similar, around one leg, between the legs, around the back, whatever. Figure eight, like all that stuff is kind of a variation or maybe is direct from those drills that you're talking about. So I do like some of it, but I guess I tend to not use the ball wrap stuff as much as the dribbling stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there's value in that ball wrap stuff as well. I mean, you get quick hands doing those things, and you just get a better feel for the ball. So I think there's value in it for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy to watch kids do that stuff because they really do struggle with it. Like they're not able to just go like we would do in the demo or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, maybe that comes from the time we spent as kids doing it ourselves. So, okay, what about like tactically wise? Like, is there like I just want to keep diving deeper into that. Is there anything else you can think of tactically that your coach did? You're like, this doesn't make sense.
I don't think there were too many that I could sit there and be like, this doesn't make sense at all. I feel like the tactical stuff that we did, if we were going over X's and O's here or there, I didn't have too many major issues. I mean, one of the programs I played for, we used to, I guess one thing I can think of is we used to double the post every single time. Like no matter who the post was, it was a double every single time from the weak side. And I guess like thinking back on that, I don't necessarily love that idea. Not because it's wrong, but if you don't rotate right out of it, or if they have a post player that can pass at all, you're just giving them an advantage every single time, So that's not something I personally teach, but I also get why if you do it right, it can be really effective, So yeah, that might be the only thing that I've experienced that I was just like, nah, like this probably long term for me as a coach, I'll probably not take this one and keep it with me.
One that just popped into my head right now for me specifically was when I was playing overseas and we weren't allowed to jump to block shots. We weren't allowed to leave our feet. We just had to go straight up. And at the time I just hated that because, I was like, how can I ever contest anybody? But as a coach, I kind of like it now. Like I might consider that. I mean, we have a pretty short team next year. So, there's no reason for us to be jumping around trying to block shots. You should probably be trying to stay ground, take charges, and be ready to box out, keep our guys out the paint. So who knows? I mean, like we said earlier, there's going to be some things that we hated as a player, but now we can see and like as a coach. And that's definitely, I think, one of them that who knows, I might try to implement.
Right.
Another one too, that just kind of came to mind was forcing baseline. As a player, I used to always hate forcing baseline because I felt that I was giving up baseline. I felt like, hey, I could guard this guy so easily and stay in front of him no matter what. But now the fact that I'm not allowed to let him go middle, now I'm not 100% confident I can stay in front of him going baseline. But if it wasn't for that rule, and I guess it was because it was such a hard rule, like I would literally get taken out the game if my guy went baseline. So that's one thing. And actually, I've been thinking about this conversation that we're having right now over the past few weeks a little bit about how can I incorporate more stuff that I discovered as a player, although maybe it's not right, but I felt like I discovered it and helped build my philosophy. How can I incorporate that into coaching? So we are a hard force baseline team, but I think at this point, we're definitely going to loosen the reins on that just due to the fact of, this conversation and what I've been thinking about over the past few weeks.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that, just in general, you talked about like, oh, you get pulled out for letting someone go middle, I guess that's one thing that maybe I'm not a fan of with some of my coaches was that like making one mistake and taking a player out. And I guess that's not like something that you're doing in practice. That's more just how a coach reacts in a game. But I've never liked that. I think it just doesn't build confidence. I think you're always afraid that I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to get yanked out. And like on one hand, is it possible that you're going to get a bunch of players that are really, really strict to what you want and that they're going to, always do their best to do exactly what you want? Yeah. But at the same time, if they mess up, and the fact is like they are going to mess up because they're human beings, they're going to be so worried about it and like constantly being ripped out of the game. And then it's like, well, what if your guy just dropped 20 points in a row? Are you going to still take him out just because he let one person go middle one time? Like that. I just don't like those type of hard rules. I think you need to understand the flow of the game, what's going on. Now, if you're consistently getting beat middle every time and the other team's scoring on that player, then yeah, you probably got to take them out, right? But if it happens once and then 4 times in a row they get stops, like to me, I'm just like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to let it go until I see it being like a major issue, because that player could be playing really well, or even if they're not, scoring a bunch, even if they're just doing other things on the court that are like, it's a good unit. Sometimes you just have a good unit together, and even though that player's not scoring, they're just fitting cohesively really well in that unit. It's like, am I going to take them out and put someone else in who may take stupid shots and screw up the flow of the game? So I just think you have to always be like, as a coach, understanding what's going on and not just, well, these are my rules, and like, so no matter what, I'm going to stick to this, because I think you put yourself in really bad, like in bad corners sometimes when you get into those type of spots.
Yeah. We say that all the time, right? That nothing's black and white in basketball, but for whatever reason, I guess some coaches just have these hard, fast rules about that kind of stuff. So, all right. Is there anything else you can think of that, as a player, just kind of frustrated you? Anything that maybe translated over to where you, besides the pull-up drill you're talking about, that you do not do as a coach because you hate it as a player?
So this is not a drill, but it's just something, again, kind of off the court, but like being super strict on like dress code and on like policy. Again, like I'm all about policy. I think there are some things you have to be really strict on. Like I said, showing up on time. That's there's no arguments. There's no like, hey, sorry, I woke up late, or my phone didn't alarm me, whatever. Like, you either show up or you don't, right? Outside of like an emergency, right? But so that one, you can be hard on that rule, I feel like. But for example, I've had coaches that were like, okay, maybe a guy wants to wear compression top, right? Or wears compression sleeves on his legs or whatever. And like, I've had coaches that were like, well, either everybody wears it all the same color or nobody wears it. And so obviously half the guys don't want to wear them, and half the guys do. And so then it would become this issue, or like some coaches would be like, okay, you can get taped or ankle braced, but then some would be like, no, you have to be all taped, or, oh no, you have to all wear ankle braces. And I'm just like, to me, I don't care, as long as you do one or the other. If you're doing something preventative to help your ankle, then I'm good with it. If you're wearing compressions and at least it matches our jersey and you feel comfortable in that, and someone else feels comfortable without any compressions, I don't really care. Like, as long as it's not going to affect how you're playing, then that's what really should matter. I'm not going to make a bunch of issues and problems out of like, well, Johnny's got an arm sleeve on and, this other person doesn't. Obviously, you don't want to be like over the top. I don't want my players to look all decked out and not actually be able to play well. But, I don't mind little things here and there. And I think you can set it up in a way that makes it comfortable for the players, but also still fits the team. You do want to look like a team. You do want to look professional. I am very much about that. But I think there's wiggle room within that, where you don't have to be hard and fast about every little thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I had this same situation too on some teams where no headbands, no nothing like that. And I'm in the same boat. That was one thing where I said, hey, I'm not going to do that when I'm a coach. And that is one thing that I've steadfast with too. So that's interesting. We both have that same experience. It must just be a generational thing. Honestly.
I do think it is. And I think like some of my coaches that were older coaches that, had been coaching for 25, 30 years, and they grew up in a generation where, first of all, a lot of those things weren't worn at all. And so to them, it was like everyone wears the same jersey and that's it. And everyone wears the same shoes and that's it. And there's no questions. And, and we talked about this earlier in episodes that coaches from previous eras were a little bit more drill sergeant like, not everyone, but some. And so I think because of that, it's harder for them to adapt to this newer game where that's just common. That's part of basketball attire now. It's not even like, it's not like in the 90s even where that was like new and players weren't doing it as much. Now it's just every player wears something like that, or most, I would say well over half are wearing some type of compression or, something like that. So does it make you a better player? No, but if you're comfortable in it, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and some players, are very insecure in their jerseys too, whether they got, they're super skinny or whatever, and so they like to wear a little something to just make them feel more comfortable. And I think if you deny them that, then that's just not right, as long as if you care about them and their experience in your program. But all right, well, I hope you guys liked today's episode. That's really all we got for this week. And if you did like it and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. We're trying to get our subscribers up there. And if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, then go ahead and follow us and subscribe there as well. We come out with a new episode once a week. We hope to see you guys in the next episode. You guys have a great day, and we will see you then.
Peace.